everyone, this is I-24 News. First, our headlines. Israel and Hezbollah escalate their rhetoric ahead of a possible larger conflict. Prime Minister Netanyahu initiates a public clash with the Biden administration. And Israel's right-wing coalition government looks fragile than ever tonight. Threats, spins, and videotapes. Israel and Hezbollah are on the verge of a war that supposedly nobody wants. I-24 News' Robert Swift is live in northern Israel with the latest. Robert.
So starting first of all with Nasrallah, the chairman of Hezbollah, who just a short while ago wrapped up his speech where he came up with some pretty interesting comments. Now, generally speaking, his rhetoric is often quite bombastic, filled with a lot of exaggeration. But even so, there are some comments in it that will stand out. One of which is the fact that he said that if Cyprus was to be involved in any way in supporting Israel, if Israel was to come to a larger scale conflict with Hezbollah, then Cyprus would put itself in the Lebanese organization's crosshairs. Additionally, he said that one possible scenario which Hezbollah is keeping front and center in its possible scenarios for an escalated conflict would be an invasion of the Galilee. Now, this in itself seems like it may be yet more exaggeration from him. It's likely that if Hezbollah was to come to an escalated conflict with Israel, it would be to its advantage to play a defensive conflict, to pull Israeli forces into the mountainous terrain inside Lebanon. But nonetheless, he's making these threats. And he also additionally made comments regarding the drone footage that was released yesterday, drone footage of Haifa. Now, it's possible that the drone, which infiltrated Israeli territory, even passed down the coastline just to my right, one possible scenario of how it was able to dodge Israeli radar is by slipping down the coastline to Haifa, which is just to the south of us. And in the process of taking that footage, embarrassing the Israeli defense establishment, and that's likely why he reiterated the point regarding that surveillance that the drone conducted. Now, of course, as you say, both sides, despite their rhetoric, are looking to avoid an escalated conflict, and the US itself is very much encouraging Israel to avoid a conflict, with comments coming from advisors in the US administration, even suggesting to the Israelis that if an escalated conflict were to occur with Hezbollah, it could not be ruled out that Iran itself would become involved and would launch potentially cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and drones, as was seen previously. A question in that scenario would be to what extent Israel would have the support which it enjoyed last time around, support which was able to neuter much of the Iranian attack.
All right, Robert Swift, thank you very much from northern Israel. As you've mentioned, Robert, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah spoke a short while ago and said this, among others.
We have a significantly large amount of intelligence on Israel. What we published yesterday was only a few minutes of many hours filmed over Haifa. What you saw was just a taste of what we have. Our drones provide us information to help us strike important targets inside Israel when the time comes.
So here in the studio we have tonight Yaki Dayan, former Israeli Consul General to Los Angeles.
Good evening,
Thanks for coming. And Dan Perry, former, among others, Europe and Middle East editor with AP. Yaki, a word about Cyprus, first of all. Why Cyprus?
As you know, once the collaboration with Turkey stopped, there became an axis between Cyprus, Greece, and Israel, training together, all kinds of military training. So now, and there is lack of confrontations in the Middle East. So he's turning to Cyprus and maybe Greece next. But this is why Cyprus, because Israel is collaborating with Cyprus on a military level.
Dan, we've said this is supposedly a war that nobody wants, but still can happen.
Yeah, first of all, Hezbollah has been attacking Israel for well over 8 months, and they seem to be calibrating these attacks so as to not cause so much damage that Israel is compelled to reply. But they're going to miscalculate. So on one level, eventually some event will happen that will force Israel's hand politically. The other thing is Israel can't tolerate this situation forever. If there's linkage between the situation in the north and the Gaza war doesn't end, that means that under this absurd paradigm, Hezbollah keeps firing shells and rockets and then drones at Israel for the next, 7 months? It's inadmissible. Nonetheless, Israel's strategic equation is very bad because neither do they want to risk the damage that a full-scale war against Hezbollah would probably bring to Israel's cities. And Israel also is not eager to make good on its threat to attack Beirut and Lebanese infrastructure for a lot of reasons, including that it's unfair because they don't really control Hezbollah. And at this particular moment in Israel's grappling with international near pariah status, the last thing Israel needs is to create destruction in Beirut. So they want this to go away. And realistically, Hezbollah is getting what it wants, because it's going to look like they helped compel Israel to end the war in Gaza.
Yeah, some of us remember the phone call from Ronald Reagan to Menachem Begin when he saw on TV Israeli warplanes bombing Beirut. This is 82.
But that's an important point, because I would add one more point to what Dan mentioned, and this is exactly the Americans. I mean, Israel depends heavily on the diplomatic umbrella and the ammunition coming from the United States. And the United States clearly doesn't have any interest of having a full-scale war now between Israel and Lebanon. And I mean, the situation currently works for Hezbollah, because what happens now is that Hezbollah is providing a smokescreen for the Iranians to make significant progress in their nuclear military plans.
Right. So you've mentioned the United States, and now a new rift with the United States is initiated by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Over what? The White House says they have no idea what he's talking about. Here's more in the next report.
We genuinely do not know what he is talking about, is what one White House spokesperson had to say in response to the claims made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the U.S. was withholding arms.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies.
These harsh criticisms have come out despite the U.S. only withholding weapons on one occasion. At the same time, President Joe Biden has been subjected to increasing pressure to suspend military aid to Israel, but refuses to do so. Netanyahu also compared Israel's current war against Hamas in Gaza to the fight against Nazi Germany.
During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
At this time, Washington's Democrat Party opinion remains divided on the war. Some saying that Israel needs, quote, freedom to operate on its own timetable, based on tactical realities in the Middle East, not on the political winds in Washington, while others are preparing to boycott Netanyahu's address to Congress next month.
Let's go to I24 News' Mike Wagenheim in New York. Mike, this is getting even worse. The administration is canceling an important strategic meeting with an Israeli delegation.
Well, canceling, postponed, depending on your point of view. Yes, there was supposed to be a meeting of the U.S.-Israel Strategic Dialogue, specifically focused on Iran. It involves a number of different agencies, the State Department, the Pentagon, so on and so forth. The White House is saying we couldn't quite get everybody on the same schedule, so we never put it on the docket to begin with. Don't worry, it's only postponed. Meanwhile, the Israeli side saying they cut it, they canceled it, and it may be rescheduled for a later time. The bigger question here, Jacob, is why Prime Minister Netanyahu decided, whether he's right or wrong, decided to air the grievance the way he did with a publicly distributed video. Generally speaking, when there are disagreements with the administration, they're voiced through unnamed sources. You put out there exactly what you hope to do it through a lesser recognized channel, even getting it out into the media, even through ministers, somebody else other than the Prime Minister himself. And we also have to keep in mind there's two different things at play here that I don't think are being recognized. One is the Biden administration's refusal to move on certain weapons, specifically those heavy bombs that they were afraid would be used in Rafah. That is a definitive move. They say, we're not moving these. It's under review. This transfer is paused. Then there are what we call the bottlenecks, which happen all the time in terms of the delivery schedule, and things get delayed in production, and there are budgetary matters to deal with. Those are not irregular things. If that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it's unclear, again, what he's referring to, if that's what he's referring to, that's something completely different than the Biden administration saying we are making a deliberate effort here to hold up delivery of certain weapons. So again, just as the White House said yesterday, it's unclear what the Prime Minister was referring to, and hopefully we'll get some clarification. The Prime Minister's office released a statement saying that U.S. Ambassador Jack Lew told Prime Minister Netanyahu that these weapons that are apparently being held up will be forthcoming, but there's been no comment to that effect from the American side as of yet.
Okay, Mike Wagenheim, thank you very much for that. As Mike have said, the big question is, why is Netanyahu doing this? There are many speculations. Dan, you have a guess?
I think he's trying to help Trump by rubbishing Biden. I mean, it would seem incredible to some people, but we all know he would rather have Trump win the election, and it seems purely political. I have to underscore, you have to go back in history a long time to find something so reckless as currently picking a fight with the U.S. when Israel's being tarred and feathered all over the world. Countries are recognizing the fictitious state of Palestine. Italy's trying to slap arms embargoes. Britain even is bristling. The U.S. is critical for Israel for munitions that enable the continuation of the war, for the veto at the Security Council, without which there would be economic sanctions at this point, quite possibly. And also, by the way, notice that the ICC hasn't yet even approved the request for the arrest warrant. That may have something to do with the Americans making threats against the ICC. All this is on the table, critical for Israel, and Netanyahu is messing with it for reasons that appear to be political, whether it's to meddle in U.S. politics or because he finds some value in throwing red meat to his base here, and you get pretty far with the right-wing base in Israel by rubbishing Biden. Whatever it is, it really had better stop.
Even the base argument was not that strong among Israeli analysts who are really baffled of this.
Listen, Jacob, I would say that airing this video was quoting the Prime Minister inconceivable. I mean, that was a huge mistake. Huge mistake. I mean, one has to remember that the only friend we have now, providing us a diplomatic umbrella, providing us ammunition on a daily basis, really keeping Israel safe in each zone, is the United States. And having said that, I think that Biden is a good friend of Israel, and waiting for Trump wouldn't be a good strategy, not only because he might come only in January, and until January who knows what would happen, but the strongest, the pillar of support for Israel is the bipartisan support. And losing the bipartisan support and moving only to the warm hug by the Republicans would be a serious mistake.
In about a month from today, Netanyahu is going to appear before Congress, and you think he's like, what, going to go full into American politics?
It certainly does look that way. And look, in statements Netanyahu makes off the record, and at this point it's become a bit of a joke in Israel how his off-the-record statements are at this point attributed to him. I mean, it's incredible. And what will be really interesting is whether Biden, with Netanyahu a few hundred yards away, will or won't invite him to the White House. And if he doesn't, at that point, it really is a signal that there's a major rift between Israel and its only, at this point, only dependable ally. And I must say, it is almost heartwarming to see how Biden distinguishes between Israel and its government, because the disdain for its government right now is, I have to think, very extreme. Again, historically, it's rare for a foreign policy crisis to clearly endanger the re-election prospects of an American president. You have to go back to 1980 with Jimmy Carter, but then it was a crisis created by the enemy Iran. Now it's a crisis amplified by the government of its ally Israel.
Listen, Dan, even afterwards there were rifts between Israel and the administration. I mean, the last one that I remember was between Obama and Netanyahu. But this is significant. No doubt this is a significant rift, and we don't have to wait whether there would be an invitation or not to guess whether there is a rift. There is a rift. Yeah. And what I hear now from the Democrats, that around 100 Democrats, legislators, are not would not attend the Prime Minister's speech. And this number might increase. And that's a big problem for Israel, because again, it demonstrates that the support for Israel now is not a bipartisan support, but rather a partisan support, something that weakens Israel.
I have to say, though, despite all this, the U.S. continues to support Israel in its war aims. It's something that needs to be noted.
Absolutely.
Netanyahu's various actions and statements are clearly endangering Biden's re-election, and that is something that cannot be said of anything since 1980, and that could never have been said of Israel. Look,
in 2014, Obama was afraid that he felt that if Israel attacks Iran, and he thought that Israel might attack Iran, then he might lose the election. His entire policy was aimed towards Israel, containing Israel, not to attack Iran. There were major rifts, but I agree with you. I mean, the support is really phenomenal. The support that the Democratic administration is giving Israel.
And in the background here is an even bigger thing. A few weeks after Biden became the first president to visit Israel during active wartime, they began to try to engineer a major reset in the Middle East that is in Israel's interest in a very extreme way. And Netanyahu basically has projected indifference to this, as far as anyone can tell, because it's unpopular with the extreme right on which his government depends.
I differ you, Dan. I think that the whole Saudi plan is based on recognizing a Palestinian state. And it's impossible, whether you are Netanyahu or Gantz or Eisenkot, or even much more towards the left, Lapid or others, to recognize after October 7th a Palestinian state. Listen,
but I mean, they're talking about a path.
And this is a path, but this is a vital thing that the Saudis are insisting to have, and this is something that in this future strategy that the Americans are trying to provide to the region, this is something that the Prime Minister cannot accept.
I gotta say, though, this is a point that is under some debate and contention, because there are plenty of people involved in the talks who will tell you that could have been lip service on a Palestinian state. And the main issue that has been an impediment to progress towards, I repeat, normalization with Saudi Arabia, which is an Israeli dream of many, many decades, and an alliance of the Sunni world and Israel against Iran with Western and NATO backing. What's standing in the way is even an ability to discuss the day after Hamas in Gaza.
I would say the day after is very important.
Well,
I would make,
and even that. It's been 8.5 months, not one discussion about what comes after Hamas, if there is a day after Hamas.
The Israeli public opinion, whether it's center or even left or right, is against a Palestinian state right now, because there was, when we tried to engage in Oslo, the engagement broke. When we tried to disengage, it broke. So again and again, the Palestinians are against any process of peace. So this is in the Israeli public opinion. There is a consensus in that. So any prime minister, regardless whether it's Netanyahu or anyone else, would not be able to follow this path.
I got to reply though, if we have to. There is not a consensus against the Palestinian state at some point in the future. More than that, depending on how you phrase the question, there could be a majority in favor of it. There is a consensus that it can't be done right now. And I do not think the Biden doctrine demanded that.
It's being asked right now to do that, to recognize that.
It's being asked that Israel enter negotiations, a pathway that might lead to it. The very thing that Netanyahu agreed to under Trump in 2020.
We are after October 7th, and B, this is not the plan.
But even after
this is not the strategy. I mean, what is being asked from Israel, and we cannot, you cannot mislead the public opinion. What is being asked from any Israeli prime minister would be to accept and recognize a Palestinian state right now. The principle which would follow concrete steps on the ground.
Let's agree, it's very hard politically, but
rather complex
to your point about a senior Israeli political source is being quoted right now as saying the countdown for an Israeli reaction to Hezbollah has started.
Again, saber rattling. How is that helpful? And if you're going to do it, do you want to advertise you're going to do it?
If you want to shoot, don't
really,
talk.
Exactly.
All right.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. The question is, which is Israel, the good, the bad, or the ugly? I mean,
I appreciate the great discussion here. Now, alongside the Israeli-Hamas war, there's also a bot war going on, if you will, and that refers to social networks and efforts to influence public opinion. We are joined by Andrew Fox, an expert on defense and misinformation. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
How is this war being fought? Tell us about it.
So We've done a lot of studies using AI, looking at various social media accounts using particular hashtags or particular words and phrases. And it's enabled us to track just how many bots are out there and how many bots are swarming everyone in the world's social media feed with disinformation or misinformation. And I'll give you an example. So on the 8th and 9th of October, in the days immediately after the massacre, looking at 449,000 accounts spreading 734,000 posts in 48 hours. And it's been worked out that these people had a potential reach of reaching 531 million social user accounts. So that's just in 2 days. So that gives you an idea of the sheer scale of fake accounts and disinformation pushing that's going on out there. And the themes these bots were pushing were also about how good and generous Hamas were towards hostages. That was the kind of information they were pushing.
Who was behind this mainly? Hamas, Iran, third parties?
I'd suggest that there is a very clear axis in the world at the moment behind this conflict, where we see autocratic states lining up against Western democracies, and I would include Israel as very much the front line of that in the Middle East. So we know Iran do this, we know Qatar do this, we know China do this, and we know Russia do this on a grand scale. And whilst it's very hard to track where the bots come from unless you've got access to the records of the social media company, and obviously we don't have that, but we can make a very clear assumption that it's going to be from the access of those countries.
Yeah. There was a New York Times report about an Israeli influence campaign as well on U.S. lawmakers, right?
Yeah, and that was done under the Ministry of the Diaspora, as I understand it. And it was very nichely targeted at certain politicians in the United States. But it was also a pretty poor effort, because that was really easily traced for a variety of technical reasons. And I don't think, Western countries particularly, I don't think we engage in this large-scale bot war in the way that the autocracies do. It's just not a democracy sport, because it's easy to track, and I generally find that our enemies are willing to lie and, fight this war for the narrative, whereas Israel, for example, has the ability to fight the war on the ground that Hamas doesn't. If you look what's happening in Gaza, it's a heavily defensive war on Hamas's side. They're not, actively counter-attacking the IDF with the forces in a great scale. They've stopped entirely Gaza. They're relying on information war to help them.
Yeah, let me try and ask another question, see if we can get the audio straight. All right. Now, according to what you say, the West, democracies, they are doomed to lose this war.
Yeah, I think unless we have a very clear strategy on what we're actually going to do to counter this flood of disinformation, then we're on a losing curve. They're attacking our social cohesion. They're trying to generate pressure on our governments by mobilizing people in the streets. And we need to be a lot more severe about who we allow to broadcast this information into our countries. And Germany gives us a pretty good model of what we could copy. They've got their NetzDG law, which holds social media companies responsible for hateful content on their platforms, and perhaps something like that. Making social media companies be responsible for what's put on their websites is the way to fix this problem.
All right, Andrew Fox, thank you very much for that. Back to the studio here, Yaki. I mean, the way Israel lost the public opinion on social networks and elsewhere is pretty remarkable.
Absolutely, Yaakov. But first we have to remember that the policy has to be coherent and the strategy has to be coherent before we turn to the public opinion. That's the first.
You mean have a product before you sell it.
Exactly. And the second point that I would make is that we live in a world of coalitions. And in a world of coalition, as was mentioned here, you have Russia and you have North Korea and you have China and you have Iran on one side, and Israel has to join this coalition headed by the United States. But there are other countries that can join us in this public opinion, cyber cooperation, major countries like India. So I would recommend the Minister of Cyber in Israel maybe to head to to places like India and other places, and think about the day after that some kind of a cyber cooperation, some kind of a strategy can be formed in order to have this coalition fighting with us and not by ourselves.
Dan?
I mean, Israel is fighting at a great disadvantage for a number of reasons. One was mentioned here, which is that it's a democracy, and democracies are on the back foot when it comes to cyber skullduggery. But beyond that, there's 1 billion Muslims. And Israel's coalition, such as it is not nearly as large. And I would add, the youth in America, at this point, Israel's in danger of using them. And when you talk about social media and the TikTok universe and all that, it's heavily youth-oriented. Now, Israel has almost like happily abandoned that fight. And it's also been unlucky because this has corresponded with a cultural war between the progressives and even the liberals, not the conservatives, and the liberals in the U.S. And these narratives of oppressed oppressor and white people versus colored people, and if you're the former, you're always in the wrong, all that Israel has just like blundered into in this war. They should have been extremely proactive in developing a product you can sell. And instead they've been indifferent. There's been no public diplomacy. The various PR efforts that have happened since October 7th have been largely private initiatives. I mean, you watch this in amazement. The government has done almost nothing. They had a couple of great spokesmen. One of them famously they fired because the prime minister's wife didn't like him. I mean, it's been a Keystone Cops-ish disaster. Instead of what should have been a series of brilliant strategies to overcome the built-in disadvantage.
Thank you both. Stay with us. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back with more news here on 924 News. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Tens of thousands of Israelis are on the streets on a daily basis now, demanding elections, and Israeli police are becoming more and more violent, inspired by the right-wing minister Ben-Gvir. So let's go to Ashkelon right now in southern Israel. I-24 News' Zach Anders is there with the people. Zach.
You know, I'm always impressed by Israelis' ability to make these protests as loud as possible, and the noisemakers. There's just, everyone's got something that's making noise. And this is the corner now where we're in the corner of Ashkelon down by the beach. There's probably about 1,000 people, probably a touch under 1,000 people that have arrived for this protest that's set to begin here in the next 15 or so minutes. Quite impressive, again, to go to these sites in Jerusalem and then to see these crowds continue all throughout Israel. And that's what they say. They plan to continue this week of disruption, to demonstrate all across Israel, to show out all across Israel. So these are the scenes that we see here in Ashkelon tonight, similar to what we saw throughout the week in Jerusalem as well.
All right, Zach, thank you very much. We should notice that Ashkelon is one of the cities that was mostly influenced by rockets from Gaza over the years, and especially, of course, since October 7th. I-24 News' Balir Sladin is now live in Tel Aviv with a report from there. Balir.
Yes, so the week of resistance, or the week of disruption, as the protesters are calling it, is continuing. Of course, there's no protest here today, but we are going to witness a huge protest on Saturday evening after Shabbat, the weekly protest that includes the hostage families that also will be protesting here from the Hostages Square, as well as the anti-government protest in Kaplan Street. So the demonstrators are actually citing specifically the fact that now the war cabinet has been dissolved, and the generals Eisenkot and Gantz has already left the government, which means that every single decision that the government is taking right now is a political decision, according to the protesters, of course. And this is for them now the motive to continue protesting in order to bring down the government and call for early election. And we've witnessed today not only the criticism from outside the government, but actually some rare or some unusual exchange inside the government, inside the coalition. The Minister of National Security, Ben-Gvir, has accused the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, of leaking information from the war cabinet just moments after the Prime Minister himself accused Ben-Gvir of leaking information from the wider cabinet, the cabinet that is responsible for the security and foreign affairs in the Knesset, which means that we are starting to see some signs of a possibility to some sort of disruption inside the coalition. But if we are looking at the bigger picture, after all the parties inside this coalition has no interest in early elections, because after all, no other prime minister will give Ben-Gvir the opportunity to be a minister, and also Netanyahu has no opportunity to even build a coalition with Ben-Gvir. So there is no possibility to see any early elections soon. So the only way that the protesters will get their early election demands met is by the fact that Netanyahu himself decides that it's the right time for him to go for an election cycle, something that we still can't see in the horizon.
All right, Balir, thank you very much. Back to the studio here. Yaki, on top of demonstrations and all of that, it looks like the coalition government is almost imploding as a result of religious legislation.
Exactly. I mean, the coalition yesterday and the prime minister was dealing with petty laws like appointing rabbis in all kinds of municipalities. This is what, in the midst of a war, this is what the coalition and the prime minister found to do. And more than that, I mean, we know that the draft law is being discussed now in the Foreign and Security Committee, and this is about to fall as well. And we hear members of the Likud ruling party saying that they would not support neither the rabbi law and nor the draft law that are being presented as such. So definitely, I mean, and what is striking is to see the mayors functioning so well contra to the disability of the coalition and the prime minister to function. So what we see is the coalition slowly falling apart, and maybe those two laws, the rabbi laws and the draft law, would bring down the coalition.
And with all of that, can Israel go to another war in Lebanon?
Well, history shows that opening up a second front is not so wise, from the days of Napoleon through World War II.
Maybe politically it is.
Well, and also, by the way, Israel shows an exception because its biggest, arguably biggest military success in '67 was on 2 or 3 fronts. But I mean, yes, we watch these political shenanigans with utter stupefaction. But you know what? It's hard to blame the government here, because the fact is they promised the religious parties all these amazing
things have changed.
booty.
Well,
the religious, yes. What's changed is that if there was an election today, Netanyahu would lose, and so he's desperate to forestall an election, even though in a parliamentary system, after a failure as cataclysmic as October 7th, you're expected to resign. The narrative is that he's told the public is that, well, but first let's do the war, and now he stands accused of prolonging the war artificially. All this ends if the religious parties bolt, and so they have extortionary power. And it's not that Netanyahu found the time to deal with the law appointing scores of rabbis for secular municipalities, it's money thrown down a drain. It's that this is being imposed on him. And the question is whether at some point the non-religious elements of his coalition, the few remaining saints in Likud, will have had enough, calculating that if they continue down this path, they will become so unpopular that they will be unelectable even post-Netanyahu. It's conceivable that this will lead to rebellion, because on the surface, the way the coalition is conducting itself is so brazen that, again, to repeat a previous thing I said, you have to go way back in history to find an example of a democratic government that is so flying in the face of public opinion.
Yeah, well, to your point, Dan, Yaki, it all stems from the fact that Netanyahu does not take responsibility, doesn't want any inquiry, not going to quit anytime soon, not even thinking about it. That creates a lot of tension.
I agree. I think that all of the people that were responsible for this catastrophic thing on October 7th have to resign, whether it's the prime minister or the chief of staff in the army and others. All of them have to go. And I think that the problem in this parliamentary system in Israel is that you have to have elections in order to make it happen, because the prime minister doesn't take responsibility. And as Dan said very correctly, the prime minister is trying to postpone the elections as much as he can, because he doesn't want to face the public opinion, and at the same time, simultaneously, I mean, he's trying to avoid some kind of a government or an official inquiry on the things that have happened on the October 7th. So what we eventually, at the end of the day, we hope that some parliamentary members would do the right step and would step forward and would say, take responsibility and go home. But so far, I mean, politics is much stronger than reality.
Yeah,
here.
and I mean, there's another way to replace the government other than elections, which is a constructive no-confidence vote in the Knesset, which means the existing Knesset can appoint a different prime minister. And the Likud actually has the option of replacing Netanyahu and appointing a different prime minister from the Likud.
Slim chances for that.
Well,
this is very theoretical.
Of course, it's theoretical.
Yeah, it is.
But you know, theory sometimes becomes practice. That's the nature of the interplay between the two. It is possible for Likud to replace Netanyahu and ask the opposition to join a unity government, and they probably would be met with a yes. And Israel would have a stable government, not led by this man, who at this point is toxic for like a solid majority of the country.
They would never agree who can replace Netanyahu.
Well, of course, that's the problem.
And this is a case that would never happen.
Slim chances, as we said.
Indeed, slim
Let's
chances.
move on.
But you know what? Something has to give. I think we can agree on that.
Elections, early elections.
Over 8 months after October 7th, 120 Israeli hostages remain in captivity. Their families are still struggling to bring their plight to the world's attention. I-24 News' Natasha Kirchuk has more on that.
How are you, love? Are you okay? How's your arm? Do you have people with you? What about your heart? What are these bastards doing to you? Does someone dare to touch you? Romy, you're strong. You're strong like I know you are, right?
That's Yarden Gonen. She isn't an actress. She's the older sister of 23-year-old Romy Gonen, who was taken captive by the Hamas terror group on October 7th from the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel. She's been held in captivity in Gaza for over 8 months now. And today, her family is one of many families of hostages that have gathered in southern Israel for a very bizarre conference. They're here to meet with journalists and social media experts to hear what they need to do to make sure the world keeps caring about the plight of their loved ones.
Are the families desperate? I would love to say no. I would love to gather all the power we have to feel very, very strong, but I'm afraid it's cracking.
This is Efrat Machikawa. Her 80-year-old uncle, Gadi Moses, was kidnapped from his home in Kibbutz Nir Oz by Hamas on October 7th, along with his stepdaughter and 2 grandkids, who were eventually released in a truce deal back in November.
Our family is neutralized. I don't sleep for about 8 months now. I really don't. And it's hard. I came here today to study. I came here today to listen, to try and find out what is it that we need to do in order to take everybody, but everybody, out of their homes in Israel in order to bring the kidnapped back.
Several international journalists from around the world are speaking at this conference today to give their take on how to best advertise the plight of the kidnapped hostages, like Andy Jering, a British correspondent from the Daily Mail.
There's no solid rule as to what is going to capture the imagination, but my experience as a news journalist is that there is still massive interest, but there's awful suffering happening on both sides. There is appalling suffering going on in Gaza. That's not to take away from the suffering of the families here. You can't interview the hostages. They are in Gaza. So it's difficult to keep moving that story on. But the responsibility falls on you as the journalist to get creative and come up with ideas that do continue to tell those stories.
But for many of these families, the feeling is that the international media no longer cares about their captive loved ones, and that every day has become a fight to be heard. The youngest generation of some of the hostage families have even created a group to try and brainstorm ideas to keep the captives in the spotlight, since they say their parents are burning out. Yuli Ben-Ami is one of them, whose father Oad is still being held hostage.
My father was kidnapped with his boxer, with his pajama, from his bed. So I think that the people need to understand that it's urgent. We need the world to wake up, and we are just exhausted from trying to convince people that they are not have time.
Michael Levy is the older brother of 33-year-old Israeli hostage Or Levy, who was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival. His wife was killed by Hamas, and their 3-year-old son is now in the care of the entire extended family as they desperately wait for Or's return. It's clear that the families who are here today have no intention of stopping, trying to make sure that you get your brother's story out. If there's something that you could say to him today, what would it be?
I actually did my first tattoo last week. It says whatever it takes, and I'll do whatever it takes to get you back. That's as simple as that. That's the only thing I want to tell him.
Let's move to the Red Sea. A bulk carrier sank after an attack by the Houthis in Yemen in what appears to be a new escalation in the Red Sea. John Grumble has more on that.
A second ship attacked by Yemen's Houthi rebels has sunk in the Red Sea. Now, this ship, the Tudor, was attacked about a week ago by what appears to have been a bomb-carrying drone boat launched by the Houthis that rammed into the back of the vessel and exploded.
One of the explosions happened around 1 p.m. local time, which was an attack by drone. We weren't able to investigate immediately, and we didn't know at first who our enemy was and whether it was from the sea or from the air. We hid inside the ship and all we could do was pray. We plan to rest for now because of the trauma.
This attack is suspected to have killed at least one sailor on board. That raises the death toll from these Houthi attacks that have been going on since November to at least 4 people being killed, and 2 ships have sunk, and we have seen just near daily attacks in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden, which has disrupted shipping through that vital corridor. Now, as of right now, the U.S. Navy is still there with an aircraft carrier and other destroyers. The Navy says they're facing their most intense combat since World War II in trying to stop these Houthi attacks.
They don't grab the headlines that they used to grab, but they're having an impact, and we are trying to have an impact on their ability. So their actions are truly reckless, beyond the pale. They talk a mighty good game, but their actions speak a hell of a lot louder. They don't care a whit about Palestinians in Gaza. And this isn't some principled stand they're taking. It's terrorism, as I said, pure and simple.
The Houthis insist these assaults will continue as long as Israel's war on Hamas in the Gaza Strip goes on. And with that war going on and the Houthis continuing their fire, all this means is that shipping remains at risk in that Red Sea corridor and that these attacks are likely to continue.
Let's bring in Catherine Perez-Shakdam. She's an expert on the region. Catherine, why is the West not taking more serious action against the Houthis?
That is a very good question. I was actually asking myself the same question. What I find very interesting is that the U.S. keeps saying that it's trying. It's trying to deal with the threat posed by the Houthis, qualifying it as a terrorist attack, rightly so. But then the next question should be then, why are you trying rather than doing? Because I believe, the last time I checked, that the US is a military superpower. And I don't think that in terms of technology, even its ability to move against the Houthi, it shouldn't be too difficult to pinpoint the location of the Houthi, given the fact that it is in Yemen. It's quite easy to localize them, and even easier, I would say, to target them, especially since we keep in mind that the Saudi are also trying to get rid of the Houthis. So I would imagine that some kind of a coalition should not be too hard to wrestle. And yet we're in a position where no one is actually doing anything, not really. We keep talking about this threat. We keep talking about the fact that lives are being lost to the terror that is the Houthi. We're also forgetting to discuss the fact that the Islamic Republic of Iran, yet again, find itself behind this proxy, this group, this terrorist organization, the Houthis, and we still arguing about what is it that we should do. What we should do is quite simple, is to prevent them from having the ability to do anything ever at all. And again, the fact that we eventually coming to the realization that yes, the Houthi do not care about the Palestinians and do not care about anything else other than peddling the narrative of the Islamic Republic is kind of beside the point and also a bit too late to the party. So it's for America to decide what it wants to do, since it positions itself as the greatest police officer of the world, and yet not doing much about it when it comes to guaranteeing the safety of anyone, even less so its own people.
Let's talk a little bit about the Saudi angle. Of course, they're watching this closely, and is there any chance that the Saudis will restart their campaign if nothing else works?
It really very much depends, because look, the Saudi have an agreement with the United States of America, by which America is supposed to be a strategic ally and supposed to be protecting the interests of Saudi Arabia. Now, given the fact that Saudi Arabia has been looking what is going on in the Middle East, and given the fact also that Israel is allegedly a strategic partner of America, but America didn't do much to help Israel in facing Hamas, did certainly not help to try to formulate a narrative that would exonerate Israel from any wrongdoing, given the fact that it's a war of self-defense against Hamas, not against the Palestinian people. And that much has been done in American soil in trying to other the Jewish diaspora and doing everything that they can to paint Israelis and Jews as being the guilty party here. It's very difficult for the Saudi to believe anything that is coming out of the mouth of Washington right now, even more so the Biden administration. I think that Saudi Arabia is waiting to see who will come next at the White House, whether it's Trump or Biden, then decide what to do. Now, in terms of guaranteeing the safety of its borders, it's doing that. And so right now, I would say that the kingdom can absorb the threat of the Houthi quite comfortably. And so it doesn't want to get involved, especially, again, if we consider that the Islamic Republic of Iran is sitting right behind the Houthis, that any engagement against the Houthi would translate into an aggression against the Iranian regime. And this is something that the Saudi do not want to do alone, and I can understand why. It's waiting, I think, for an international coalition to appoint and pinpoint at the enemy, the Islamic Republic and its proxies, and actually decide on a course of action. But right now, many people, many Western capitals are still arguing. People are still, again, wrestling with the notion that Israel is very much standing alone, fighting everyone's fight, because, again, we're talking about the death of democracy with a capital D. And people are quite happy to send Jews to die, as usual.
All right, Catherine, I thank you very much for that. Quick comments here in the studio.
I would say that we live in a world of coalitions, and the Houthis are the proxies of the Iranians, and everything is interconnected. It's interconnected even to Ukraine. And in the coalition that the Americans build, they're playing only defense instead of offense. And as long as they're playing only defense and not offense, it has implications, direct implications on what is going on in Taiwan. And in other places, the Americans have to start playing more of offense than just defense.
America's weak-kneed response to the outrages of the Houthis is genuinely dangerous, and it projects weakness, it projects incompetence, it projects perhaps indifference, and basically it gives courage and succor to bad faith players everywhere, well beyond Iran. It will encourage Russian skullduggeries in Eastern Europe, and I can literally say the fact that the U.S. is allowing the Houthis to impede maritime trade through the Suez Canal increases the chances that China attacks Taiwan.
Exactly.
All right, with that, we'll move to this news. More than 550 Hajj pilgrims died in Mecca, mostly as a result of high temperatures. Bastien Bory joins us from Dubai. Bastien, what happened and what can be done about this?
Several things here. First, some of these deaths are clearly due to a lack of organization on the part of the Saudi authorities, as this is the case every year. Last year there were 240 deaths. This year more than 550. Every edition, so to speak, brings its share of tragedies, with the most terrible in 2015 when 2,000 people died due to a single crowd movement. I was able to get in touch with people who made the pilgrimage to Mecca this year in the past few days. And the situation is quite simple. In the travel packages that all pilgrims had to buy to get to Saudi Arabia, which cost an average of $5,000 to $6,000 for the cheapest, for the most basic packages, some included a very limited stock of bottled water and sun protection equipment. Others included nothing at all. And on the spot, I was told that there were very few water distribution points. So there's also another phenomenon, which unfortunately the Saudi authorities can't really curb. It's the emotional charge the Hajj represents, especially for, as you can imagine, for the older pilgrims, the very old ones. Some of them wanted to die in Mecca for the honor it represents. And a significant proportion of the victims we're talking about today were in this situation, with most of the families back in their home countries, in Morocco, Jordan, Tunisia, and so on. These families even accepting to let them be buried on the spot in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. Now, Iran has some specific complaints against Saudi Arabia. Why is that?
I'm not going to call it an epiphenomenon, but we're talking about 6 individuals identified by Iranian officials as members of an Iranian government media group, suggesting that these expulsions, these deportations, occurred under questionable circumstances, mainly because the Saudis do not want the Iranians to take advantage of this pilgrimage of the Hajj to protest, in particular about the fate of some Saudi Shiite citizens in the country. But it probably won't have serious repercussions on Iran-Saudi relations.
And what about the people from Gaza, the Gazan families that were invited by Saudi Arabia?
Well, the program was covering pretty much everything from their arrival in Saudi Arabia to their return to the Palestinian territories. So, of course, this was showcased as something that alleviates the hardships faced by lots of Palestinian families, but that shouldn't detract from the fact that Saudi Arabia does very little for Gaza at the end of the day. The Saudis do not want to confront Israel, which has much to do with their relationship with the US, on which they rely, as you know, for security, among many other things. So high-ranking officials of the Saudi Arabian government prevented these Palestinians and Muslims in general from showing any sort of support for Gaza out of fear, not only because the Hajj has always been a kind of depoliticized event, at least theoretically, but also because the Saudis were afraid that this could turn into more massive demonstrations against the authorities for various internal economic reasons that would not have been necessarily linked to what's happening in Gaza, as is currently the case in the streets of Egypt, for instance.
Right. Bastien Bourri in Dubai, I thank you very much. Also thank you, our guests in the studio, Dan Perry and Yaki Dayan. Thank you very much for coming. This would be it for us, but stay tuned for more news with Benito Levin here on I-24 News. Have a good night from Tel Aviv.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine. Hassan Nasrallah has just given a blistering speech in Beirut amid heightened tensions across the northern front as Hezbollah continues to show support for Hamas in Gaza. The chief of the Shia terror group warning that storming the Galilee is an option that remains on the table if the fighting with Israel escalates. Day 257 of the war. Nasrallah was speaking at the memorial ceremony for a senior Hezbollah commander who was assassinated last week in an Israeli strike. Meanwhile, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein is calling for the urgent de-escalation of cross-border exchanges. He's held a range of meetings in the space of 24 hours in Jerusalem, Beirut, and then back again in Jerusalem, amidst U.S. concerns that a full-blown war could erupt across that northern front. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz warning that Hezbollah would be destroyed in the event of a total war. More in this report by our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran.
The unofficial lull in fighting between Hezbollah and Israel earlier this week is long gone. Dozens of rockets and drones were fired from southern Lebanon toward Israeli northern border communities throughout Wednesday. There were no injuries in the attacks, despite some damage to buildings and small fires erupting in Kiryat Shmona. In response, the IDF says it struck multiple Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. Lebanese media reported one of these strikes destroyed the villa of a former Lebanese minister in the coastal town of Bogulia. There were no reported injuries.
We say again, whether through diplomacy or by military means, we are impeding Hezbollah's military buildup. Their stockpiling of weapons for terror against Israelis is being dealt with.
Meanwhile, Hezbollah released on Tuesday footage from what it said was one of its reconnaissance drones flying over northern Israel, including shots of the Haifa port with Israeli missile ships visible and various other sensitive security facilities. Hezbollah claims the drone captured 10 minutes of footage before returning to Lebanon in what is clear psychological warfare. The IDF was reportedly tracking the drone, but chose not to intercept it to avoid causing panic and damage.
Yesterday, Hezbollah released a video with a capability that we know, and we are preparing and building solutions to deal with such capabilities and with other capabilities that in time will also be realized in their time of need.
In a speech commemorating the killed Hezbollah senior commander Talib Abdallah in a drone strike in southern Lebanon last week, Nasrallah boasted over Hezbollah's bank of Israeli targets.
We have a significantly large amount of intelligence on Israel. What we published yesterday was only a few minutes of many hours filmed over Haifa. What you saw was just a taste of what we have. Our drones provide us information to help us strike important targets inside Israel when the time comes.
Nasrallah added that while Hezbollah does not want total war with Israel, the possibility remains, including Hezbollah's plans to storm the Galilee.
So for more, we now go live to our correspondent Robert Swift. He joins us from northern Israel. Fiery rhetoric there from Hassan Nasrallah. But let's start with what is happening on the ground today. Hezbollah claiming responsibility for that rocket barrage on Kiryat Shmona earlier in the day. We saw footage of those interceptions. What is the latest up north? What can you tell us?
That's right. So a few minutes ago, the municipality of Kiryat Shmona had said that there was some damage caused to buildings as a result of those that rocket barrage. Now, the IDF did intercept some of the fire, but up to 16 rockets appeared to have been launched, and some of them did get through. As well as causing damage to buildings, there was also some fires caused in the area, as we've seen on previous rounds of these barrages. Now, Hezbollah did claim responsibility for this attack, as well as several others that took place throughout the day. Launches of drones in the Kiryat Shmona area earlier in the day, but also launches of rockets further west, close to where we're filming from now, close to the community of Shlomi, which remains with much of its population evacuated.
And let's talk now about some of that rhetoric from Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah chief, saying they are more determined to continue the battle against Israel. Also speaking about that Hezbollah drone video on Tuesday showing the Haifa port in northern Israel. Tell us more. What are they playing at?
That's right. So first off, Nasrallah always seems to exaggerate a great deal when he makes any of these statements. The gap between what he says and what Hezbollah will actually do, is often quite large. That being said, Hezbollah have demonstrated some of their capabilities in recent weeks, recent months, with the drones, and the release of the footage yesterday, which showed aspects of Haifa from the air, will be of some concern to the Israeli military. Now, that rhetoric is not limited to Nasrallah, with the IDF and several Israeli ministers similarly coming out with big claims about how much damage they will do to the enemy. And so we can see that both sides are trying to talk the other down through this escalated rhetoric.
We certainly will be watching and unpacking all the details in the coming hour. Thank you so much, correspondent Robert Swift, live from northern Israel. Stay safe. And now for more, we welcome to studio Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, former military secretary to 3 Israeli defense ministers and the former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF. Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the US, the former Israeli deputy foreign minister and the chairman of Silver Road Capital, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Much on the go, lots to unpack, many leaders saying some interesting things. I want to start, though, with Hassan Nasrallah. Storming the Galilee is an option that remains on the table if the fighting continues. Ariel Osaran, unpack the message there and what else has been said in this fiery speech a short while ago.
Right. So Nasrallah took the opportunity during the commemoration of Talib Abdallah, the head of one of Hezbollah's frontier units, the most senior commander that Israel has eliminated so far from Hezbollah since October 8th. Nasrallah even said that it was the same Talib Abdallah who launched the first attack that initiated Hezbollah's involvement in this war since October 8th. But I think the main takeaways are obviously the Hezbollah's willingness to continue to strike Israel as long as the war in Gaza persists. Also that Hezbollah is not too moved by the different threats coming out of Israel and also from the mediators. But an unusual remark, and this stood out, I think, most from this speech, a threat to Cyprus.
That is new.
That Cyprus not assist Israel if the situation were to exacerbate. Let's just, he says, we have information that Israel is conducting maneuvers in Cyprus and Cypriot mountains. The Cypriot government must know that opening Cypriot airports and bases for war on Lebanon will make them a target. We will deal with Cyprus as if it were part of the war. Now, this is dragging another country. This could cause a diplomatic issue with Cyprus. It would be interesting to see how Abdallah Abu Habib, the Lebanese foreign minister, is going to deal with this, a Hezbollah ally. But already inside Lebanon, there's criticism against Nasrallah for dragging other countries like Cyprus into this war.
An interesting strategy indeed. Eitan Dangot, your take on exactly that. Not only does he say no place in Israel will be safe in a war, Hassan Nasrallah saying as much, but also threatening Cyprus, as Ariel says, for the very first time.
Absolutely. I think that this evening has a lot of meanings, but be aware for the conditions that we start this evening. First of all, there is no escalation that climbed up recently after 2 days of silence of the Eid al-Adha. It came yesterday, the repeat, and it coming after Israel eliminate the commander of the south area of Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is a great loss for Hezbollah. Another thing that it's not getting enough, I think, focusing in the Israeli media. The damage inside Lebanon from infrastructure, buildings, and most than all is the success in eliminate many of Hezbollah senior people on the task that are serving is much more damaging than it makes us. But we are paying a price, especially in the infrastructure or the buildings around the border. Now, you see that Nasrallah is bothering and is under not easy situation. The winds in Israel signals to him we are in a movement after coming to understand what we will do in the south, we are coming to the north. We cannot continue with this situation in the north. Nasrallah is not willing to escalate to be in a war, but he understands that the situation can bring him to a war. What is coming tonight? First of all, what he tried to threat Israel with the UAVs that are coming to Haifa mean, as I can see you, I can attack you. Secondly, the airports area in Israel that he bring to the knowledge of Cyprus, I will attack you if Israel using airports in your place, means I can attack, and he's right, I can attack Israeli Air Force bases, also with the help of Iran, and if the Israeli Air Force will use in your place, you are under a problem. And the response of the Israeli Chief of Defense Staff, I think tonight, and telling him we are not using all of the arms that we have, and we can make a game changer to the situation, makes the situation sensitive. But if you ask me, I think that Hezbollah is to be much more bothered than Israel.
Well, we certainly will wait and see and take a deeper look at exactly that in a very short while. But I want to bring in a new development, because just a short while ago, and you were talking about the way developments in Gaza are affecting developments across the northern front. Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, saying just a short while ago, Hamas is an idea that cannot be eliminated. Now, obviously, it is well known the IDF goal, part of the goal in this war, is to eliminate Hamas, something that leaders have been talking about for a long while throughout this war. Ariel Oseran, talk to us about the messaging from the spokesperson of the IDF, the significance of this message right now, and the very quick response from Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, it appears the Prime Minister is in different fronts, not only with our enemies, but also with our allies, and sometimes also with the army. And what we're seeing now is following an interview Hagari gave to Israel's Channel 13, in which he was asked about this goal of destroying Hamas that the political echelon has been pumping since day one of this war. So Hagari saying that destroying Hamas, promising to destroy Hamas completely, is misleading the public, saying that Hamas is an idea that can't be destroyed, and that if the government does not find an alternative for Hamas in Gaza, then the terror group will remain. And this is very clear, I think, and blatant criticism of the current government's policy. And the Prime Minister was quick to respond with a statement from his office, saying a very short statement, saying that the Security Cabinet, headed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, set the destruction of Hamas as one of its main goals, and the IDF is, of course, obligated to these goals. And so this opens perhaps another front, unfortunately, internally, of tension between the Prime Minister, this time with the spokesperson of the IDF.
Another front to the internal tension, something we will also take a deeper look at in a short while. Right now, though, let's turn to some of the external tension, so to speak, ties between the US and Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sharing a video with a strongly worded message saying Washington had been withholding weapons and ammunition from Israel. The White House hitting back, saying they have no idea what he is talking about. More in this next report by our Jody Natilovitz and Alex Schloss.
We genuinely do not know what he is talking about, is what one White House spokesperson had to say in response to the claims made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the U.S. was withholding arms.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies.
These harsh criticisms have come out despite the U.S. only withholding weapons on one occasion. At the same time, President Joe Biden has been subjected to increasing pressure to suspend military aid to Israel, but refuses to do so. Netanyahu also compared Israel's current war against Hamas in Gaza to the fight against Nazi Germany.
During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
At this time, Washington's Democrat Party opinion remains divided on the war. Some saying that Israel needs, quote, freedom to operate on its own timetable based on tactical realities in the Middle East, not on the political winds in Washington, while others are preparing to boycott Netanyahu's address to Congress next month.
Former Ambassador Danny Ayalon, there is no one better placed than you in terms of understanding Israeli-US relations. Yeah. Talk to us about what is going on right now, this rhetoric, these videos, this messaging, your take.
Yes, Benita, it's very unfortunate. I would say always the strength of the very, very special relations between Israel and the United States was based on real trust and closing things behind, if there are any disagreements, we agree to disagree and we do things behind closed doors. We certainly not put it up in the open. We do not surprise each other. If Mr. Blinken was here, it would have been better for Netanyahu to tell it to him, and he said, in private and not take it out into the air. So there are a few angles here. First of all, there is the military angle, and here it is quite obvious that there were no weapons that were withheld. There were some munitions, but only one shipment of this 2-ton bombs munitions. This is the only one. And I can tell you another thing is that the Americans are looking very, very favorably in opening it up and releasing that shipment, but they want to do it quietly because Biden is under a lot of political pressure. So now what Netanyahu does is not only embarrassing the administration and Biden publicly, but also is making much harder for them to release the shipment that they were going to do anyway. This is very unfortunate.
10 seconds.
Few points. First of all, I think that Netanyahu crossed a line that has been never done by any Israeli prime minister. It's not the way to find out on a compromise on crisis. Secondly, is the fact that Israeli political people are going to the United States, the Minister of Defense Gallant and others, Netanyahu on the back. He wants to show he's in the front, and he chooses to do it, I think, in a mistake way, because if they bring here the ammunition. The third fact is that I think that it is like interior involvement between Democrats and Republicans in the United States. It's not our business, not especially during a war.
And certainly there are enough tensions internally to be focusing on right now, and also looking at relations with allies, so important right now, something we will take a deeper look at as well in a short while. But right now, we go to protest action in southern Israel, convoys converging from across the country, making their way to Ashkelon. Demonstrators accusing the government of abandoning residents of the south since the October 7th Hamas massacre and mass abduction. Tens of thousands of residents have evacuated from their homes, kibbutzim, and Moshavim. So for more, we go live to correspondent Zach Anders. He joins us from Ashkelon in southern Israel. These convoys, Zach, from across the country, all part of this week of disruption. What's going on? What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right. This week of protests continue. And I've just met a remarkable woman who was a survivor on October 7th in Nativ HaAshar. And I know I'm mispronouncing that. It's taken me 10 tries. She moved from the Sinai. It's her Mashav that moved from the Sinai to the very northernmost point of Gaza. She's been displaced since October 7th. She hid on October 7th. The homes around her were set on fire by Hamas. 20 people from that Mashav were killed that day, her friends, her neighbors. She survived. She's left for months and has come back only this week because a rocket fell through her home and they were assessing the damage. A remarkable story. She's here tonight. She's wearing the same shirts as everyone else, protesting, calling for a new government, feels the same way. That the government, this current administration has abandoned her. What's remarkable about this scene, similar to what we saw in Jerusalem, smaller in size, I'd say upwards of 1,000 people just by my eyeballs, but what's remarkable here is that the counter protests, the counter demonstrations are much more vocal. Small, but they have brought in vehicles with loudspeakers. They're using these loudspeakers to say, I'm having the Hebrew translated for me, saying some very vile things towards this crowd, holding up some signs, very pointed. It's getting messy is the best way to put that. And Ashkelon and this community, I was here a lot in the early months, in October and November, when it was all but deserted. So seeing the amount of people come back to this area is one thing, but seeing these clashes is so stark a comparison to what we saw in the very beginning. Those scenes, too, of the ambulances bringing the injured, the wounded on October 7th to hospitals right here. So once again, Ashkelon, a flashpoint, and this crowd, while it's a lot of people from all over Israel, we've already met quite a few people from Ashkelon themselves, too. So really an interesting night here we're seeing as these protests all across Israel, this one in particular representing the southern communities that feel as though they're calling for a new election. They want to see Netanyahu out.
Well, we certainly will be watching to see how it all unfolds in the coming hours. Meanwhile, Zach, the IDF conducting a situational assessment with Yoav Gallant and Herzi Halevi, and they are saying that there will be an easing of restrictions for communities near the Gaza Strip. That sounds like a positive development, at least.
Yeah, it was such an interesting contrast, Benita, too. And today, the timing interesting as well as this protest take place. And you hear from the protesters that they're very upset about things like that, about the schools and the programs that have been disrupted for months with no timeline, much like the people that live in the north. No communication. That's the main thing that people here have felt as though is the main point. At least they need to be communicated, some communication for what comes next, to know how to build their lives, how to rebuild their lives going forward. So a step there, schools and programs easing restrictions. We also know that while there was initially some allowance for some of the farms around the Gaza Strip to come back, and then there was another order to end as the Rafah operation began, the allowance for some of the farm workers to be in those areas around the Gaza Strip was rescinded. It sounds like that is once again going to be permitted for some of these communities close to the Gaza Strip. So you're right, the timing's interesting here, of course, to have these restrictions eased this afternoon from the Home Front Command.
Correspondent Zach Anders, thank you so much for that update from Ashkelon. More to come from Zach, of course, in the coming hours. And I want to come back to our panel in studio and circle back to that development earlier on. We were talking about Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, saying that Hamas is an idea that cannot be eliminated. He was speaking to Israeli media on one of the local television channels here. And Eitan Dangot, your take on A, that message, and B, what it says about relations right now, specifically between the army and the government.
Yes. There is a tense between the relationship, and the tense is started from the side of the leadership, from Bibi Netanyahu. We don't have to cover it. It comes, there is attack by some of the members of the cabinet, people from the Likud or his partners from the coalition. Telling you the truth, I don't understand why. What you are taking now in the middle of the war, taking the IDF that is consensus in Israel and try to blame the commanders that are leading their soldiers now under a war, this is a thing that should not be done. Secondly, I think that the answer by Hagari tonight, it's a professional. He's not surprised anybody. Did you imagine that we will kill the ideological idea of Hamas they are bringing from the Muslim Brothers? No. We said we are going to break their military capacity, we are going to break their activities as a civil leadership, and we have achievements. But the fact is, the fact that there is nothing bring by the political level. Instead of it, we are losing our success. And the last but not least, the army is looking very intensively to the north, and he wants to release its activities in the south and move with a lot of power to the north.
Very briefly, Danny Ayalon, your take on exactly that, tensions between the army and the government right now, according to these latest comments.
Yes, it's very unfortunate that it seems like some people in the government, including the Prime Minister, are trying to take some bidding into the IDF for political gains. And unfortunately, they are the ones actually that triggering and provoking answers from that. But it is quite clear that it's not between the Prime Minister and the army, it's between the Prime Minister and Gallant, the Minister of Defense, which is giving a lot of backing to the military.
We're going to take a deeper look at all of these issues after a very quick break. Thank you, gentlemen. Stay with us. Our coverage continues on this breaking news edition. Back in just 2 minutes. Stay tuned.
voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Welcome back. Our coverage continues. More than 8 months since the Hamas terror rampage and mass abduction on the 7th of October, the fighting in Gaza continues as efforts by international mediators have so far failed to secure a ceasefire. Qatar and Cairo are still said to be putting pressure on Hamas to agree to the Israeli proposal as laid out by President Joe Biden. Palestinian media is meanwhile reporting that Israeli tanks backed by warplanes and drones have advanced deeper into the western part of Rafah. Now for more, we cross live to our correspondent Balir Sladin. He joins us from Tel Aviv. And Balir, 120 hostages are still in captivity. Still no official word as to how many hostages are alive. Hamas still not providing proof of life. What more is known about these apparent efforts to secure a ceasefire hostage deal? What is the latest?
Yes, so we have to honestly say that this specific issue is not developing at any point in the past few days. The latest was when Blinken was in the area and met with Israeli officials as well as Qatari officials trying to push the Biden framework, the announcement that Biden has announced a couple of weeks ago on that Friday evening. And Hamas said to it, yes, but, or basically said no to that framework, gave a new timeline for the deal, the three phases that we talked about before. And of course, the Israeli officials didn't agree to that new timeline that Hamas proposed. And of course, the main issue there, which is the announcement or the guarantees that Hamas is demanding from the Israelis to end the fighting or end the war in general, is exactly what is the main point of disagreement between all the sides here. So we're seeing that the Biden administration is trying to push the framework now, and even Amos Hochstein, that was yesterday in Israel and met with the Lebanese officials, said that even the situation in the north will be better in case we go for a ceasefire that includes the release of the hostages. The idea of the American administration is that Israel, when it finishes the Rafah operation and brings down the 4 battalions that belong to Hamas there, it needs to say something that might be sounding like the ending of the fighting, and then maybe the situation in the north would be different, and there could be a chance for a hostage deal. Again, this is until now, at least, it doesn't seem to be working for the sides.
And certainly much concern about those developments up north as we speak. Thank you so much, as always, correspondent Balia Sladin, live from Tel Aviv. And talking of the north, tens of thousands of residents of northern Israel have evacuated from their homes since the war broke out in October, a war started by Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon showing its support for Hamas with regular rocket and drone attacks towards northern Israel, including yet another major barrage towards Kiryat Shmona earlier in the day. So let's find out more about life for people who are living in the north right now. We welcome Haley Levinsky, a business owner and resident of the north. She joins us from Kfar Blum, a kibbutz close to Kiryat Shmona. Haley, thank you so much. We so appreciate your time. It's more than 8 months. Regular rocket and drone strikes towards northern communities, as you well know. So from your vantage point, what did you see and hear when Hezbollah targeted Kiryat Shmona yet again today?
Wow, it's amazing. It's like every morning or afternoon, you hear the rockets going off, you hear the Iron Dome going off, and put your head out the window and you see the rockets being targeted, you see falls. This morning I was driving, coming back north, I could see the rockets falling on Kiryat Shmona. It's pretty scary. It's a strange reality.
It's a strange reality and increasing regularity that you're dealing with this. What do? Do you have a safe room, a shelter? How much time do you have to get to safety?
I have no time to get to safety. We usually hear the bombs going off and then the sirens go off. I have a safe room, which was built in the 90s, so it's not really a safe room, but it's better than nothing at all. I do have a bomb shelter close to the house, but it takes me about 2 minutes to get there, so it's kind of useless. I'd rather go to the safe room and sit underneath my bed. It's the safest way to be.
Pretty scary to think that you are sheltering underneath a bed in a situation like this. I understand you were advised to evacuate in October and you went to another kibbutz south of the Golan, but not for long. You're back in Kfar Blum. It's literally a stone's throw away from Kiryat Shmona. Why are you back? Tell us your thinking.
Well, first of all, we came back because we don't have any support from the government. We weren't officially told to leave, so we don't get any financial support. So I had to come back home. I couldn't afford renting out another place, another apartment other than my own that I'm still paying rent on. And we have borders. You know, if we're not here and we leave the north, then we lose these borders. If nobody's going to be here to protect these borders, then what do we have? We can't just be from Gedera to Hadera and stay the small, tiny little country. We'll be left with nothing. I think if we're not here, then Israel's not here. We need to stay here. We need to be here. I'm actually it's kind of being ambivalent a little bit. On the one hand, I'm really scared to be here because you hear the sirens going off and the bombs falling all around us and the drones going, this morning there were so many drones flying by and exploding and you hear everything and you see everything. On the other hand, this is what we have. And if we're not here, then who's going to be here? Then we lose this part of Israel. So it's a strange reality.
A strange reality indeed. I think it's incredibly brave. And I'm wondering, from a business point of view, I understand you have an exercise studio. Are your clients nearby? How are you surviving? How is business in a time like this?
Well, business is near to nothing. I'm on about between 15 and 20% of my clients are here. Most of my clients have been evacuated, so they're not here. People that are here aren't too keen on moving too far. So if my studio is it's in the neighboring kibbutz, people don't like driving around too much, especially there were days that the sirens were going off every 5 minutes and the bombs were flying in every direction. And I had to cancel classes because it was just too scary to go out. I've had quite a few times that during class, the sirens go off and we had to run to the bomb shelter. Where I teach is not a safe place at all. It's a very old building with no protective roof. So we really run as fast as we can to the nearest bomb shelter, which takes about 15 seconds. And like I said before, you hear the bombs going off before the sirens start going off.
What a terrifying prospect indeed. You will well know that Amos Hochstein has been holding meetings in Jerusalem and Beirut as well. We were talking earlier on in our broadcast about Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah chief. Very clear rhetoric, very clear threats coming out of Hezbollah right now. What is it like to hear all these news developments from where you are sitting, where you are living right now? What would you want to say to these leaders? What would you want to see happen realistically right now?
Wow, I hear Nasrallah talking, and it's scary. It's the scariest thing you can imagine. It's I think of it and I think, okay, there was the 7th of October. It can happen here, and it'll be scary if it happens here. Although I trust the army more that they'll react better now than what they did then. If it was an idyllic world, then having a ceasefire, having some kind of deal on the table would be the greatest thing. But I don't trust terrorists, and I don't believe that something can happen. And unfortunately, I feel, and I think a lot of people feel the same, that going and bombing them and trying to get rid of as much of the Hezbollah as possible is the best solution. It's not something idyllic because it's scary. We'll lose a lot of soldiers and people can get killed more like that. But in both directions, we either fight for the right to be here or we don't fight and we lose what we have. So I believe in the IDF, and I believe in our country, and I believe in who we are. And I really hope that things will get better, but I'm scared. Honestly, I'm really scared. I'm scared to be here. I have a 14-year-old son, and every time I send him off to somewhere, it's scary. It's scary to think. I hear Nasrallah talking, and it's scary. I don't have any, I know that I need to stay here to protect what we have, but
it's scary indeed. It's scary indeed. And again, you are incredibly courageous. Haley Levinsky, be safe. Thank you so much for speaking to us live from Kfar Blum, close to Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Incredible bravery, courage. What is the right word? Eitan Dangot, we were talking at the start of this broadcast about Hassan Nasrallah. Very clear, direct threats to Israel, to people like Haley, living, wanting to make a living, wanting to be safe with her son. And what lies in store?
For continuing his deterrence towards Israel by all the circle of the war now between Hamas, Hezbollah, in Syria, I think also the Iranian, etc. I think that what is the main thing that Nasrallah tonight tried to use is the threat with invasion to Israel and to use this tool as something that is aware about what is in the Israelis' minds from the 7th of October. And I'm looking on it very seriously. He cannot do it on the same way as it can be done on the 7th from his point of view, but he can make it in local places. But what is the great man? I think that he has much more to lose in such circumstances, but we have to be very serious by listening to him and how we prepared our forces. First of all, we made immediate step by closing in a very strong defense. We call this offensive defense, and the damage that in Lebanon is worse in a few levels than in Israel, but he's still using it, and we have to look at it very carefully on the post of the army near the border and some of the kibbutzim or other villages that are near the border, because what he wants to show a flag for 2 hours inside some of these places to show like he make entries or maneuvering inside. But on the other hand, I think that Israel is preparing a very, let's say, a strong and large using by ground forces, a lot of fire by targets, and also opportunities in order to move Nasrallah from the south in Lebanon. Now coming to what you just reminding you in what you said to the people who are looking or watching us about Amos Eckstein. There is very clear diplomatic mechanism how to make a ceasefire, but it looks very far from both sides now, and maybe we will have to face such scenario of a high military escalation. And we have to understand, Hezbollah is not Hamas. Hezbollah is a part also of Iranian, and it will be something new, but we are stand by ourselves in order to reach this target. And you have to pay attention. Israeli Prime Minister using in the last days said that one of the goals is the returning of the North people, civilians, back to their homes. It was not said at the beginning of this war. And what does it mean? We are very close to a junction that Israel should take a decision, but everything is based on what will be on the south. What we didn't mention tonight is the fact that there is 120 hostages, that they are the important operator for everything here.
Well, Balir was saying in his update a little bit earlier that there is no progress on the diplomatic front, Danny Ayalon, in terms of getting to a ceasefire hostage deal, despite the apparent pressure from Cairo on Hamas to actually accept the proposal that has been laid out. Talk to us, though, realistically. Amos Hochstein in Beirut, in Jerusalem, twice, talking once again, yet another visit. When you speak to people like Haley earlier in her home, just wanting to make a living, live in her home, be safe with her family, what realistically are the chances of some kind of diplomatic outcome soon before that full uptick happens across that northern front?
Yes, I would say this is a quite complex situation, but Hezbollah is pretty much following the orders from Tehran. And, you know, they are through and through an organ of Tehran, serving the interest of Tehran, certainly not the interest of Lebanon. They understand that. So this is why they would be very, very, I would say, hesitant to start an all-out war with Israel. Nasrallah, we know, and you mentioned it, Benita, earlier, he is a master of psychological warfare, so he's trying to actually put a parallel between the Israeli capability and his by saying that he can storm, you know, the Galilee. Actually, he lost the opportunity on the 7th of October. If he had any chance to do it, the 7th of October was the time to do it. Israel, of course, rushed immediately 3 divisions up to the north, because this was the main threat that they were actually bracing from. And right now, as General Dangot said, you know, we have a very strong defense over there. And actually, what we are seeing, both in the south, in Gaza, and in the north, Israel is working very methodically. I know it is frustrating, and we have some, you know, painful casualties, but we work like a steamroller. They do not actually swerve us from our targets. We will finish militarily, not the idea, of Hamas. And then, if Hezbollah doesn't come to any kind of a political agreement, then I'm afraid there will be no other choice but war.
One thing, Danny is right, but I may add that, like Haley and Kfar Blum, Hezbollah is looking the situation, the atmosphere in the for the civilians inside Lebanon, especially in the south. One of the things that convinced Hezbollah to stop the war now in the Eid al-Adha was the fact that he wants to give the people the atmosphere of holiday, and he stopped the war for 2 days. It means he's looking what is the situation and the feeling of the civilians in Lebanon, and there is a lot of antagonism towards Nasrallah himself inside Lebanon about the threat that is coming from Israel.
Complicated situation, of course, too, inside Lebanon as we speak, as you are outlining. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Stay with us, because we are now turning to another part of the globe. A devastating and disturbing attack in France. The gang rape of a 12-year-old Jewish girl in Paris. 2 13-year-old boys and another 12-year-old boy arrested. The attack sending shockwaves through the Jewish community and, of course, across the globe. The girl telling police she was approached by the 3 boys while she was in a park near her home with a friend and was dragged into a shed on Saturday evening. They beat her, sexually assaulted her, called her a dirty Jew, and threatened to kill her. So for more reaction, we bring in Simone Rodan-Ben-Zakane, the Managing Director of the American Jewish Committee in Europe. She joins us from Paris. Simone, just when you think you can't be more shocked anymore, this horrific, violent attack on a 12-year-old girl in a suburb in Paris, it's difficult to process. And 3 boys arrested. They're boys. What is your response? What are you seeing and hearing?
As you said, these days it's difficult. We go from bad to worse to horrific to unimaginable every single day. We have had anti-Semitic attacks in France. We have had anti-Semitic murders in France. Let's not forget that France is the country where the most Jews have been killed since the end of the Holocaust. 15 Jews have been killed since the beginning of the years of 2000. But nevertheless, we have seen with this horrific rape another level. These are, as you said, these are kids, because you can't call them anything else. They're 12 years old. The victim is 12 years old, but also the perpetrators are 12 and 13 years old. So we have really reached another level of horrible, of horrific, and obviously it resonates also to a great extent to what happened in Israel on October 7th. We know about the rapes, about the sexual assaults, and so all this obviously also resonates because it happens within a context of an explosion of anti-Semitic acts since October 7th, since the beginning of October 7th. In the year of 2023, we have had 1,000% of increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes, and in the beginning of the years of 2024, we have had only in the first 3 months we have had a 300% of anti-Semitic incidents in increase. Staggering, as you say.
And Emmanuel Macron is denouncing the scourge of anti-Semitism, exactly what you're outlining there. So what is he going to do about it? It's just ahead of snap elections, your side of the world.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's the major question. I mean, we always get statements. And I have to say, statements are important, including from the president, including from the prime minister in a particular context. But the only way to fight anti-Semitism is 24/7, all year round, every single day, and make it a priority. Since October 7th, we have been commenting the increase of anti-Semitism. What has been done more? Nothing really. And by the way, it's not just France, it's everywhere else in the world. We're looking at a phenomenon. We're saying that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine, that we are faced with a huge increase of anti-Semitism, that Jews are nowhere safe anymore, but nothing really happens in terms of policy. So there are a lot of things that can be done. We know that in particular for young people, in particular in schools, in particular on social media, there is a very specific problem. So there are things that can be done. And the president knows this and the prime minister knows it. But for it to happen, it needs to be a priority 24/7 a day. And as you said, we are now in an electoral context where also the issue of Gaza, of the Palestinian cause, of Jews, of Zionism has been instrumentalized over the past month. And politicians, in particular on the far left, also bear responsibility when on October 7th we have had politicians on the far left calling the acts, the horrific acts of Hamas, acts of resistance. Well, what do you know? When you have young kids who are listening to this kind of things, it's only natural that we have that result. So it needs clear attention and a zero tolerance policy all year round, 24/7 a day.
So to that exact point, I'm curious in terms of the reaction in France to this horrific attack on a 12-year-old girl. Is there outrage? What is your sense? How's it being covered in the media?
No, there is outrage without a doubt. Every single politician, particularly in the race now, in the parliamentary race, has been making statements. Again, the prime minister has been making statements. Different ministers. There was just a rally an hour ago in front of the Paris town hall where hundreds, probably thousands of people came together there to denounce it. But I have to be very honest. I'm a little tired. It's important. It's important we're coming together. But I've been doing rallies for the past 20 years. What is changing? That is the question. What is the government doing? What is civil society doing to make sure that Jewish people in France, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, everywhere in the world are safe and don't have to fear of being raped, of taking their kids to school, of going to synagogue, of wearing a yarmulke on the head? That's the real question.
And very briefly, if you don't mind me asking a personal question, do you personally feel safe as a Jewish woman in France right now?
Listen, I have the privilege of living in a nice neighborhood where I don't face anti-Semitism, but it's not easy. I'm a public personality. I get hate, insults, death threats probably every single day. And obviously, as most Jews in France, I ask myself the question whether it's reasonable to raise my kids here in France. I have 3 young children. And we obviously every single day ask ourselves, where is the best place to go and what's the best thing to do? I love this country, and I think there is a lot that can be done. I still bear some hope, but the questions are obviously there.
The questions are definitely still there. Simone Rodin-Benzakein, live from Paris. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time on I24 News.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Danny Ayalon, when you look at the political changes happening across Europe, your thoughts right now? Anti-Semitism is rising. There's no doubt about it. What can be done? We don't have much time.
Yeah, we remember Émile Zola in Dreyfus, J'accuse. I really blame the politicians of Europe because they are not mentioning the massacre of the Palestinians on the 7th of October. So they not put the Gaza war in that respect. And also they're very tolerant to all those really thugs, most of them Muslims, that go out into the streets with anti-Semitic slurs and with hurting Jews. I think at the end of the day, what we will see here, not only this rape of these Muslim kids, not only in the context of anti-Semitic act, but also in the context of Muslim violence in Europe and in France. And this could give Marie Le Pen a big boost in the elections coming up.
20 seconds.
Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, he is the guy that showed the flag of such behavior all over the world, from the fact that he forgot very quick what happened on the 7th of October, and he shows the anti-Semitic way, and also made the escalation against Jewish activities all over the world. He is the guy that has to be punished for it.
In a war started by Hamas. Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangard, former Ambassador Danny Ayalon, as always, appreciate you being here in studio. Thank you. That's a wrap. Stay tuned.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות i24 News.
i24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
i24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, i24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day,